Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good, straightforward topic today, and abrupt. Let's do it. What's the story from your hometown? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The mayor's aide hit my mom with his truck when she was 13. Guy needed glasses to drive, but wasn't wearing them. The mayor made all the charges go away, even though my mom was severely injured. Just things that happen in small towns. Her whole family, except for her own parents, sided with the mayor. Years later, one of Mom's cousins married his son. We don't speak to or see anyone from Mom's side of the family. My next-door neighbor lost his mind and held his wife and son hostage for 8 hours in their house, and the SWAT team was there. Spike trapped his car and surrounded the house. I was only 8 or 9, and at the start, was more concerned about my ability to go to school because that day was field day. I wasn't allowed to go to school and had to be evacuated out of my house by 4 SWAT members. He ended up surrendering, and I missed out on my last field day. F you, Joey's dad. We had a pet serial killer on the loose a while ago. Poisonous food was being left for them to eat, and we lost something around 20 of our furry friends. The town was in an uproar, and luckily the prick was found. The city police were quick to hand him over to the state police before the town lynched him. The retired principal of the elementary school was on his riding lawnmower in his yard. He apparently went a little over the property line onto his neighbor's yard. The neighbor came out and shot him dead. Some nut job rammed the front door of city courthouse with his SUV with the intent of getting in and taking hostages. Instead, the city SWAT team was about 30 seconds away in the middle of a drill, so the van was already loaded and ready. He didn't get very far. 2 guys followed a woman and her kids home from a store, tied them up, beat the husband, R'd the mom and her 2 girls, then burned the house down. The husband got away, but the mom and girls died. They sped off and crashed into the cops that were on their way to the scene. One died, the other's in prison. A football player at my high school died standing at the corner, waiting for the bus to take him home from school. The stop sign, located about 2 feet over his head, just dropped off and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. Found out the next day at school. It was devastating. Older brother came home on leave from the Air Force at night without the family knowing. He killed his younger brother, tried and failed to kill both parents, left his 2 younger sisters untouched. Tried to plead insanity, couldn't convince them, serving life in prison without possibility of parole. 7 years later, same street, late at night, 18-year-old taps on 16-year-old ex-girlfriend's window. She answers the window. He produces a gun and shoots her in the head. She survived and is still functioning and still has shrapnel in her head. He was charged with attempted murder, did his time, and got killed in a car wreck a few months after his release. Same street, the next year, a father hung himself in the garage. 16-year-old kid in the late 1980s murdered his whole family with an axe in their home after an argument with his dad. Being a small Midwestern town in the 1980s, the media blamed it on the naughty music he listened to. It was especially scandalous because he went to the private Catholic high school where all the perfect and pious kids went. He lived his whole life in prison. Probably Shirley Turner. If you've ever seen or heard of the documentary Dear Zachary, yes, then you're familiar with her and the terrible things she did. Massive failures on part of the government, child protective services, and law enforcement, to say the least. I'll be honest with you, the Dear Zachary documentary, A Letter from a Father to a Son, it's 93 minutes long. For some reason I remember that, and I'm pretty sure I cried for like 75 minutes of it. I can be a sucker and cry at things for sure, but as a parent and a human being, it's one of the hardest watches I've ever had. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend it carefully, but it's effective for sure. And the person was horrible. Serial killer in the 90s, Herb Baumeister. I could walk to his property where he buried the bodies. His wife and kids were clueless. His kid found a skull, and Herb said it was from a medical skeleton that his dad, a doctor, had. His wife denied access to the property to the police for a while because she believed her husband. My neighbor got chopped up by her boyfriend and burned her remains in the fire pit outside her house. He kept telling her family, who legit lives down the street, that she was away on a business trip. His story wasn't adding up after like 6 weeks of not hearing from her at all. He's serving life in prison now. Kid was walking home from school with his Walkman on at full blast, and he liked to walk on the train tracks. He just wasn't thinking, one assumes. The next day, they told the school about his death over the morning announcements, and I was bummed all day. Finally, my buddy was like, "Did you know him?" I told him no. Then he's like, "Then why do you care?" I suppose it was a good question, but really, that's an effed up way to die. We have a race up and down a mountain, Mount Marathon, on the 4th of July. It's not a huge mountain. Up and down usually takes 1 to 2 hours, and there are race workers and volunteers along the route. One man just disappeared during the race and was never seen again. They never found his body or any evidence of him. There were a lot of rumors about his faking his death, running off with a mistress, etc. When I was in high school, 3 teens drove home from one town over where a corrupt bar owner would let teens come in and drink. They hit a sharp turn and rolled their car. It caught on fire, while 2 of the 3 passengers were either trapped inside or too beat up to escape. One person crawled from the wreck while she listened to them burning alive. The bar owner was never charged. When I was in kindergarten, a friend's father murdered-suicide his entire family. It has been widely suspected that it wasn't actually a murder-suicide, but a drug lord hit. Their daughter was in my class. Before I was born, a man 1 state over murdered his girlfriend, stole his mom's car, and fled. He was trying to find a place to hide and cruised through our town, trying to evade police. He stashed his car in a back alley. He saw someone doing yard work, shoved them inside, and barricaded himself, taking their entire family hostage. Several hours pass, with law enforcement setting up camp and trying to negotiate. The father in the house tried to be a hero. It did not end well. Everyone in the house was killed after the father tried going for his hunting rifle. Hostage taker shot himself shortly after killing everyone else in the house. My drill sergeant from military school ended up getting somehow romantically involved with a 14-year-old girl. She was in his passenger seat when the cop showed up, and he was brandishing a knife. Ended up stabbing the poor girl to death before he got shot in the head by the cop that used to be the officer at my middle school. All this happened in front of my ex's house. He'd had a reputation at my military school for beating up kids in the bathroom on occasion. Crazy, terrible thing. I have a lot of stories about tiny towns in rural Oregon. Meth labs exploding, meth labs raided by 3-letter government agents, which resulted in a shootout. The latter was a house that was a friend's family was renting out. Next door neighbor murdered a friend over a weed deal and got 30 years in the clink. Some butch lady that was hiring locals to work on her farm, then secretly murdering them and feeding their bodies to the pigs. I worked on her farm one summer myself. I guess I was one of the lucky ones. Those are just the ones off the top of my head. I could probably write a book about the place, and sometimes I threaten to do so.